What is the role of Australia in the Olympic Games?
And I suppose, our role is basically just as a competitor nation, and I suppose being from, the developed world, we tend to, place more importance on it and put more money into it than third world countries, but obviously not as much as, some other countries, I suppose.
There we heard Peter Fitzgerald, former Athletics Australia Chairman of Selectors, outlining the role of Australia in the Games today. Fitzgerald's statement on the differing levels of national funding and the differing social and political importance placed upon the Games highlights the variety of ways nations interact with this global sporting festival. Our focus here is the role of the media in the 1956 Olympics and the implications this has had for the expansion of the Games to the global festival it is today. The Australian Olympic Committee, or AOC, describes the 1956 Olympics as the Games that took the Olympics to the world. Indeed, it was the first Olympics held outside the United States or Europe, which then provided the platform for the IOC's proclamation of the Olympics as a global festival. Secondly, it was the first Games in which live television broadcasts could be sent to public audiences around the world. However, the AOC overplays the role of these live television broadcasts. Indeed, it was the failure of the Games to utilise this technology that prompted the IOC to embrace this new media outlet and expand themselves and the Games to global levels. Prior to this failure, Australians at the time of the Games had already turned an eye toward the international aspect of the Olympics as they reflected upon international reactions to Melbourne's selection as a host. The article you see here asserted that after the IOC's decision, Melbourne received a worldwide congratulations. There was also a level of excitement surrounding the international media spectacle the 1956 Games would attempt to provide. The article you see here, printed on November 21st, 1956, proudly exclaims that no previous Olympiad has won such wide news coverage. The article highlights that in order to conduct this large-scale coverage, special studios, interviewing rooms, film and tape processing laboratories, and foreign language typewriters were all provided for the visiting international news agencies. Organisers were desperate to impress these agencies. The 7 major ones from the United States and Europe were all given special facilities. In addition to the provision of these facilities, Australian fruit, wine, cigarettes, literature and guidebooks were all left in the hotel rooms of the visiting journalists in order to make a favourable impression. However, despite the possibility of live broadcasting and the efforts of the local organising committees to stage a massive media spectacle, the coverage of the Games was not the big success these organisers and our newspaper article had hoped for. The opportunity was squandered as commercial disagreement between local and international forces arising from the perceived profitability of the Games meant live broadcasting was incredibly limited. During the 1956 Games, the local Olympic Games Organising Committee of Melbourne were in control of TV broadcasting rights. The committee and the major international news agencies entered negotiations to decide the role of TV broadcasting at the Games. The industry wanted royalty-free access to 9 minutes of footage from the Games each day. The organising committee believed this would undermine the commercial profitability of the Olympic film sales in the months after the Games' conclusion. The result? A virtual blackout of international television news coverage from the Olympic Games. The failure of the 1956 Games was not for naught, as it demonstrated to the IOC that control of this new innovation and the opportunities it presented could not be left in the hands of local authorities. Seeing the failure of the negotiations, the IOC president, Avery Bunbridge, took the reins. Bunbridge was spurred into this decision and he realised the opportunity that live TV broadcasting presented in providing funding to a revenue-starved IOC whose entire budget was less than $10,000 a year. Not only could it provide an abundance of capital, but it could also reduce the space-time dimensions that had so far separated the host nation and its international audience. So he created Rule 49, stipulating that while he would leave the live television broadcasting negotiations to the local OCRGs, all other TV-related contracts were now subject to IOC approval. Bunbridge had to leave the OCRGs with some sense of control because of the lack of funding the IOC provided local committees with. As highlighted by the table you see here, over the next 50 years, TV broadcasting rights raised IOC's revenue production to extraordinary levels. This production of capital, as well as the increased spread of coverage through live TV broadcasting, enabled the Games' elevation to a truly global festival that now sees over 200 nations competing at every Olympics. Despite the IOC's position legally controlling TV broadcasting, the immense revenue raising actually destabilized the IOC's control of the games and its ideals. As you can see in the table here, the United States television broadcasting rights fees have dominated the revenue raising of the IOC. The result was an IOC heavily influenced by the United States, so much so that in 1993 the Winter Games were moved from the same year as the Summer Games, as US television companies wanted to spread out the task of revenue raising. The United States' influence extended beyond the administrative to the ideological, as it helped foster the Western hegemony of liberal and democratic ideals that are central to the contemporary Olympic movement. In addition to the US dominance, nations outside of the First World have found it difficult to participate in the current global media spectacle, and have instead had to channel their broadcasts through other nations' media outlets. This is problematic for these nations as the broadcasting is a customized version of the games produced for the local national consumption and underplay the role nations outside of their own play in the production of the Olympic Games. So while the Games may be a global event, its distribution and participation is by no means equal.